Hey everybody, it is so good to see you again. My name is Vladimir Dutin. My colleague Anne-Marie Green is getting some much-deserved time off today, and in fact this week. I'm happy to be with you. Let's get straight into it. The crisis surrounding the U.S. Postal Service is escalating across the country as the 2020 presidential election looms. President Trump has ramped up his war on mail-in voting by threatening to cut funding to the agency as he continues to falsely claim that mail-in voting leads to widespread fraud and rigged elections. Several states are opting for mail-in voting this fall as the coronavirus pandemic grips much of the country now. Congress is looking to take action to protect the Postal Service. Coming up in just a few minutes, we will speak with our chief congressional correspondent, Nancy Cordes, about how House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is calling lawmakers back to Capitol Hill to address the crisis. But first, we are taking a closer look at voting rights and access around the country, especially in key battleground states. Now, this, of course, all comes as the pandemic and the U.S. faces a national reckoning over systemic racism. And Caitlin Huey-Burns has been really digging into this. She has been tracking this story, in fact, a lot longer than it has raised national attention. Caitlin has been covering not only the U.S. Postal Service crisis, but also how it affects voting with regards to the pandemic. And so she's been doing a lot of reporting on that. And in fact, she has a brand new series that she's going to be tracking. And we're going to actually talk to her about her reporting in just a little while. I can see her standing by while we wait for her piece to come in. Let's talk to Caitlin, and afterwards we'll roll your piece, Caitlin, as we wait for it to come in. So Caitlin Huey-Burns is joining us right now. You heard me with that sort of long preamble, Caitlin, touting your reporting, all the reporting that you've been doing on the U.S. Postal Service, specifically how it relates to mail-in voting and how the coronavirus pandemic will also affect voting just in general in the 2020 election. So let's start first with the mail-in voting. Why has it become such a political flashpoint this election season? And in your reporting, have you found that it benefits one party from another?
Hi, good morning, Vlad. Well, we're really excited to share this series with you. Such a critical issue at a critical time. We've been reporting since April that election officials across the country have been kind of sounding these alarm bells and asking for more resources to be able to conduct elections fairly. And in talking to experts and state and local officials, they say that there isn't really evidence for any party to benefit from mail-in voting over another. So there is no kind of partisan benefit here, but it has become a very partisan issue, mostly because the president has been railing against vote by mail. He's been incorrectly saying that it is fraudulent, and there is very little evidence of that. We've talked to lots of experts and looked at lots of data to show that it is very, very rare. But what we've seen, the effect of that is that it is starting to take on a partisan lens, that Republicans are less likely than Democrats to support the expansion of vote by mail in their states. So while we haven't seen one party benefit over another because of mail-in voting, we have seen it become a big political flashpoint, and one that has been driven and continues to be driven by the president.
And Caitlin, there's a major shortage of poll workers across the country. So what are officials doing to address this issue?
Yes, this is a really critical point that I think is important to highlight. As we're talking about vote by mail, we also have to recognize that there are going to be a lot of people who still will want to vote in person. And because poll workers are usually senior citizens, they're therefore more susceptible and vulnerable to coronavirus. We've seen in primaries that have occurred during this pandemic that lots of people did not feel comfortable showing up to be a poll worker. So there was a shortage of poll workers. That means that polling locations have to close down. That means that there have been and will be longer lines if they don't have enough polling locations. So all of this together presents a real challenge for the vote in November. And so we've talked to state officials who are partnering with local chambers of commerce. A really cool thing that some people are doing in some states are partnering with sports teams. Remember, the sports are pretty much all on hold. So you have these big, huge arenas kind of just sitting there. In places like Georgia and Michigan, you're going to see some of those turned into voting locations for people to actually have more space and resources to be able to cast their ballots, and recruiting some of those workers perhaps to work the polls. And it's really important to stress to some young people who want to be engaged in this process, this civil engagement. Sign up to be a poll worker or get the training. There's an effort underway to kind of cultivate a new generation of poll workers, and this is a really important issue heading into November.
You know what else is really important, Caitlin? You're reporting on all of this. We've got your piece ready to go, so let's roll that out, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
In the lead up to November, you'll hear a lot of this.
Your vote matters.
Please vote.
Get off your butt. Get out and vote.
Just vote.
Vote.
Vote, vote, vote. The future is in your hands.
It seems like an easy course of action, but voting isn't easy for everyone. There are regulations in place that make it harder for some people to vote, and that's no accident.
The vote is the heart of American democracy. We all believe that passionately, but it's also been a big fight over the centuries about how we vote, who votes, and very often people trying to make it harder for other people to vote.
Waldman says barriers to voting are often subtle.
They can look kind of bureaucratic and complex, but in fact they have the same kind of impact, unfair impact on Black voters and Latino voters of some of the laws from the past. Vote suppression is not just something from long ago newsreels. It happens today. It happens now.
Many of the key restrictions have come over the past decade and involve voter ID laws, cutting back on early voting, eliminating same-day registration, and redistricting.
We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting.
The former president said those words in a eulogy for John Lewis, whose activism led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That monumental law banned literacy tests and other discriminatory barriers to voting. It mandated that states and localities with a history of such discrimination seek federal approval to change their voting laws.
The American people heard our cries and responded to our pain and to our suffering.
But in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down that provision, arguing it was based on old data.
What that means practically is there is nothing that stops a state from passing a new law and evaluating first whether or not it's discriminatory, and any effort to stop it has to be after the fact. It's much easier for states to pass discriminatory voting laws.
One of those laws centers on voter ID. A majority of states request that voters present some form of identification in order to cast their ballot. And several key battleground states have strict enforcement measures.
There are people who say, why is it so hard to get an ID?
It's not just, you have to have ID, but it's also that you have to have certain kinds of IDs that Black and Latinx people are often less likely to have.
Experts say the pandemic threatens to make things worse. A shortage of poll workers in November could lead to fewer polling locations and longer lines.
Poll workers are dedicated, but many of them are senior citizens and are at health risk and aren't in a position to do it this year. The lines to vote, long lines, are found in Black communities and Latino communities and not in white communities. That's been documented over and over again.
While many states have expanded the option to vote by mail during the pandemic, several states require witness signatures or notaries. And most states require absentee ballots be returned by Election Day, so threats to Postal Service funding could suppress votes.
They want $25 billion for the post office because the post office is going to have to go to town to get these ridiculous ballots in.
And the Postal Service has warned 46 states and Washington, D.C. that your ballot may not arrive in time to be counted. So election officials say send in your ballot as soon as possible. And remember, you don't have to rely on the Postal Service. You can drop off your ballot at the local clerk's office or put it in a secure drop box. So make sure if your county has one. And Vlad, that will even save you on postage.
It's an important piece of advice, Caitlin. And I guess the question I have is, because of the influx of mail-in voting, are you concerned, are people concerned that we may not even know the results from the presidential race on election night? I mean, you had the president suggesting that it could take years. I don't believe, are you hearing that we could actually potentially face something like that?
Well, officials that I've been talking to say we need to prepare for at least election week, maybe election month. And that's because you do have several states who are scaling up their mail-in voting in a way that they haven't done before. But the real key here, and the reason why we may see a delay in knowing the results, is because many of these states, by law, are not allowed to start opening up those mail-in ballots until election day. Not just processing them, but opening them up. And that actually takes a lot of time. Think about all the mail-in ballots that are coming in just to be able to open them and get them ready to be processed and counted takes a long time, and an infrastructure that some of these states don't have. So I've talked to officials in places like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Remember, key battleground states where Donald Trump, states that helped Donald Trump win this election in 2016, they are not allowed to start opening up those ballots until election day. Now, there's some legislation in place or proposed that some hope to be passed to be able to allow for a smoother transition. But we should alert our audience that over and over and over again that we may not know the results in election day. That does not say anything about the integrity of those results. That will remain. But these states are saying that, just be prepared that it takes a while to process these ballots.
And Caitlin, what are experts saying about the number of people that they expect to vote through mail-in voting? I mean, given what we've seen just over the past couple of weeks, past couple of months across the country, people are going to bars, people are taking vacations, people are going back to restaurants. How concerned are officials that folks may not actually use this mail-in voting as perhaps much as we think that they might? They might actually go to the polls.
Vlad, that's a really important point. We saw during the primaries, especially in places like Pennsylvania, that they saw a record number of people wanting to vote by mail and doing so. But you bring up a really important point, and so they're preparing for that, but you bring up a really important point about there are going to be lots of people that want to show up in person because that's how they like to cast their ballot anyway. And you have to wonder the ways in which the president is continuing to disparage mail-in voting, and this news from the Postal Service that if you send it in the mail, it may not arrive in time. That may force a lot of people to decide, I'd just rather vote in person to make sure that my ballot gets in there. And that's why these states have been clamoring for more resources to be able to conduct those in-person elections safely. That means having lots of safety protocols in place, ensuring the number of poll workers. All of this is designed to help a safe and secure election. And that's why we're continuing to talk about it and need to be continuing to talk about it in the next several months. But remember, if you want to vote by mail still, you can drop it off at your local clerk's office or drop it off in a secure ballot box.
And we want to keep hammering that point home. Caitlin, before I let you go, the Democratic National Convention kicks off today. I posted on my Instagram a picture of all of us back in 2016, where it was a much different environment. And one of our former colleagues said to me, I expect to see the balloon drop in the CBS News Upper West Side Bureau when it happens. There will be no balloon drop. There will not be the big crowds that we saw back in 2016. But we can expect some really exciting speakers over the next couple of days. Who's speaking today and what can we expect from them?
That's right, Vlad. I saw your post and I was reminiscing too. Maybe we can coordinate some kind of balloon drop in my New York City apartment, which is just a few blocks away from yours. But they are still having a convention, so viewers stay tuned. Michelle Obama is the keynote tonight. Remember in the last convention, as you and I saw, she was really able to rally up the crowds. And as you can tell, usually I'd be on location, but you can hear an ambulance on my block here in New York if that's interfering. But Michelle Obama and Bernie Sanders are the ones to watch tonight. The Democrats are trying to replicate a live convention the best way that they can, so we'll see kind of what changes are in place. The biggest challenge for the Biden campaign is to make an affirmative case for their own ticket, and they'll try to do that with a variety of speakers, starting with Michelle Obama tonight.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns for us. Thank you, Caitlin, as always. Appreciate your reporting.
Thank you.